Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and you're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. And today, my guest is Tom Schwab, and I am so excited to have Tom on the show. Tom is the owner of the Interview Valet, and I met him at a podcast convention maybe 3 years ago. He probably doesn't remember our conversations, but it was one of the few bright spots I have for an old guy who was at a show with, I think, like the average age was 23 or something like that. But at any rate, it was a great lot of fun talking to Tom while I was there. And he reached out and asked me on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. And I could not resist. So I'm having him on. But before I bring Tom on, because I keep forgetting to do this, please, 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 after you listen to this show, whether you like it or you hate it, please go to wherever you listen to your podcast and leave an honest rating and review. It's really important for us and it helps us a lot. So let's bring Tom on and start the show and we'll get going. Hey, Tom, how are you today?
Josh, I am doing wonderful. And when you said an old guy at the meetings there, I think you were must have been talking about me because I have more gray hair than you do.
Yeah, but I don't have hair, so so that doesn't count.
Well, and I think that's the testament to podcasting, right? Because it doesn't matter if you're young, if you're old. This is one of the mediums. I know some people are watching on video now, but when you listen on a podcast, it's a non-discriminatory medium. Sometimes you can't tell how old they are, how young they are, and people really just listen for the content.
Yeah, well, as they like to say, I have a face for radio, so so we could go on with this silliness all show, but let's add some value for our listeners. Um, Tom, tell me something. When I think about podcast, and you really are an expert on podcasts, and I'm assuming you were one of the first booking agencies for podcasts that existed, if I'm not mistaken.
I
Am I
believe
correct there?
we were the second one, but we really focused more on the marketing side, right? People say, can you help me get on a podcast? Well, there's a million podcasts out there. You don't need help getting on a podcast. What most people want is help getting on a podcast and helping them grow their brand and their business. But yeah, we started back in 2015.
Yeah, so you've been at this a while. So tell me something. If you were to advise somebody today and they only had a choice of doing one or two, they could either do their own podcast or they could work as becoming a guest on a podcast. What would you advise them to do?
Well, first of all, I would ask them what their goal is for it, right? It's almost like Uber, right? Uber is a great platform, but people will say, should I be a driver or a passenger? Well, what's your goal? You know, and it's the same way in podcasting. So if your goal is to go out there and get new leads, new followers, new social media links, well, definitely go out and be a guest, right? That's going out into different ponds and fishing. If you want to nurture your current leads, your current customers, then be a podcast host. I don't think it's an either or. I think often it works best as a both. But personally, I've been on over 1,200 podcast interviews and I haven't launched my own podcast yet. And people ask, well, why? And I'm like, because it's hard work. Anybody that says doing a podcast is easy or, has either never done it or never done it well. There's a lot of work and the great ones just make it look easy. And to me, being a guest is so much easier. It's leveraging someone else's platform. All you really have to do is show up and answer the questions. Now, granted, you should also promote it, but being a guest is a whole lot more, in my mind, powerful.
Yeah, I think being a guest is more powerful. What you're doing is when you're doing your own podcast, you're speaking to your tribe. And your tribe already knows what you're about, or the vast majority of your tribe already knows what you're about. But when you get a chance to go on someone else's podcast, you get to introduce yourself to a whole host of people who probably have never heard of you before. At least that's been my experience. I've not been on nearly. I think I've only been on probably 100 or 125 podcasts, but It's still a fair amount, and I love guesting, and then I love hosting. And as I told before we start, one of the great things about hosting a podcast, at least for me, is I get to speak to lots of people who I would never ever have the opportunity to speak with. And as a podcast host, you get to do that because people tend to come on. It's rare someone says, "No, I'm not interested in being on your podcast."
And
Eh,
if they are, it's probably more of a timing issue than not wanting to have the conversation with you. And there's a lot in marketing now where they say you're one funnel away. Now, I'm a big fan of funnels, and Russell Brunson is great, but I believe that you're one conversation away, right? You're one conversation away from a new client. You're one conversation away from a new partner. You're one conversation away from a new resource. This idea that everything comes through a funnel. The best things in my life, I have gotten through an introduction and a conversation, not through a pitch and a funnel.
Yeah, I think that, funnels are fine once I'm shown interest in something. And product launches are fine once I've shown interest in something. And they all work. I mean, the truth is I have bought stuff I really shouldn't have bought for online courses using product launches because after the 98th email I've gotten about it, I've clicked and said, okay, I'll try it. And then I buy it and never look at it. And that's one of the challenges with online courses, at least in my experience.
And often people think, well, since other people are doing it, it'll work for me. You know, but those people that are doing it, by and large, the ones that are getting results are the ones you already know, right? Brendan Burchard is one example I use. Um, I've heard him, I've listened to his books, I've gone to his events. There's that know, like, and trust already. So if he pushes out something in a funnel, in a launch, it's different, right? I already know, like, and trust him. And then if somebody comes out straight cold, I have no idea who they are. They haven't had that conversation with me. Um, they haven't built up that know, like, and trust. So why would I jump in the funnel? So I think because sometimes we look at it and say it worked for them, it'll work for me. Well, only if you've done all of that foundational work too.
Yeah, it's not, everyone says is looking for the easy way out, and there is no easy way out. It's, I love, I'm a big music fan, and especially jam bands. And you'll have these bands, like there's a band out of Vermont right now called Twiddle, and Twiddle is the new Fish, if you know who Fish
Okay.
is. Um, and they've been at it for 8 years already, and they're just starting to break out. Same thing with Fish. Fish was an instant success after 10 years of trying. The Grateful Dead, same thing. It's when you go with these bands, or and it's true for any success I see or any person. The idea of the instant overnight success, it probably happens, but it happens like 1/10 of or 1/100th of percent of the time. Most of the people, there's a lot of sweat and that work that go into it before they get there. So, Tom, I have a question for. I want to just go back to why a podcast. We speak mostly to blue collar business owners here, and they do Main Street businesses. Why would they be interested in either hosting a podcast or being a guest in a podcast? Because it seems to me that most podcasters have at least a national footprint, if not international footprint. And if I'm selling garage doors, I don't need that. I just need people in my community to know, like, and trust me.
Most are like that, but not all are like that. And that's one of those things that I always talk with people if they want to do podcast guesting and their reach is within 10 miles of Kalamazoo, where I live, you're not going to get a lot of customers from that, but it could be a great proof source. It could be great backlinks to your site. It could be great content to repurpose. But don't think that everybody in Kalamazoo is going to listen to you. Flip side is if you're a podcast host, there's probably not a whole lot of people in Kalamazoo that want um, to subscribe and hear every week about garage doors. But if you can make something community based, that can be so powerful. And I think there's a gentleman, he's a realtor in Nashville. And I remember talking to him early on, and he was going to do a podcast about, moving to Nashville and buying your first house and the rates and all the rest of that. And I'm like, who's going to listen to that? So instead, he came up with the idea of he interviews people that have either lived in Nashville all their life or have just moved to Nashville. And he talks about what you like about it, what's different there. Well, all of the sudden, he's interviewing people from the Predators, I believe it is, which is the hockey team there,
Yep.
from Titans, and now he's got a relationship with them. He interviewed the mayor, who's a lifelong Nashville resident. So now he's got all of these different contacts. So when that next multi-million-dollar contract comes in from the Titans, and they're like, "Do you know any realtors around here?" They can say, "Oh yeah, I just was talking with this person. You should reach out to him." So it's really being seen as a leader in your community. And I think so many people miss that opportunity, that it's not about talking about me, right? It's not talking about my company, my service, but putting the spotlight on the customer. Let them tell their story, make them the hero of it. And that's what causes people to share it, right? There's that
So
old joke about how do you sell newspapers in a small town? Put everybody's name in it. They'll all buy a copy, and their mom will buy 5 copies.
That's very true. So you just said a word that sort of I've been thinking about recently. I've actually been on a soapbox about this for the last several months. But one of the things I do on my LinkedIn thing, I ask people to send me their websites. And ask them to send me their websites for two reasons. One is I'm curious about what their business is and how it works. And the second thing is I want to see how they're talking to their customers, because this has become an obsession of mine in the past 6 months or year, is that too often I see people in businesses, and it's true in podcasting also, where the podcast host makes themselves the hero instead of the guest the hero. The podcast the podcast host, at least in my opinion, needs to be the guide. And we need to be the guide in how we communicate to our customers also. Too often this is just my opinion, we make ourselves into the hero, and nobody wants to do business with a hero because heroes are intimidating, but guides are not. Guides help you to get from where you are to where you want to be. And it's really important to realize that when you're on a podcast as a guest, you're the hero. When you're the host of a podcast, you're the guide. And keep that role really clear in your mind. Does that make sense to you, or am I way off base?
I love that, but I'm going to flip it around to the other time, right? So the host is the guide of the podcast, but the guest should be the guide to the listeners, right? Because it's not all about me. It should be, here's what I have learned. This is what can help you. You know, uh, Somebody helped me with this. A friend of mine who's a lawyer, the whole definition of what is an expert, right? An expert legally is someone who knows more by their degrees, their training, their experience than the normal person. So, sometimes the guest expert is, a PhD that's got all these letters behind their name and has written all these books. And honestly, that type of expert doesn't always work that well because people are intimidated by him. The host is intimidated. The audience is intimidated by them. The ones that do the best are either the ones that are like the old sage, the person that's done it all of these times and can talk about it. They can talk about their war wounds, the things they've learned, or even better, I always call them the Sherpa, right? That person that's going along with you. One of my favorite examples is there's a gentleman, Nick Pavlidis. He wrote a book called Confessions of a Terrible Husband, Lessons Learned from the Lumpy Couch. I mean, here's a guy that knows exactly what you're going through. It's not a marriage counselor that has PhDs and all the rest of this. It's like, no, Nick's been there too, and I think that makes it so much easier for people to relate to them, and they're the guide that's going along, but the guide that can understand the audience too.
Oh, I love that. That's great. That's great. So, you have a pretty interesting business background before you started doing the Interview Valet. What brought you to become the owner of this company or
Oh,
start the company?
it's always, I look at history is about evolution, not revolution. And it only makes sense in the rearview mirror connecting the dots. So by degree, I'm an engineer. I'm a mechanical engineer, so I think of the world in systems and processes. And I started out in the nuclear powered Navy. And people always say, that was amazing. In your 20s, you were running nuclear power plants. And I'm like, no, what is truly amazing is that people much smarter than me could come up with the systems and the processes and the culture to make it reproducible. And so when I left the Navy, I went and worked in corporate America, first as an engineer, then in operations and sales and marketing. And one of the things that I saw was that often people were either making it up as they went or making it up like it was the first time every time. And I'm like, let's learn from this. Let's put systems and processes in. So I started my own distributorship, sold that back to the manufacturer in 2008, and we had a sidelight product. And at that time, in 2008, I didn't want to do another brick and mortar. And I had read a book by two smart guys out of MIT, Brian Halligan and Dharmesh Saw, called Inbound Marketing. And they went on to form HubSpot. And they talked
They
about,
did.
yeah, the world has changed. People don't want to be sold. They don't go to the internet to be sold. They go there to solve problems. And those people that solve their problems get the know, like, and trust. So I can remember calling and talking to them and said, hey, do you think this will work for e-commerce? And they're like, well, it should. I'm like, I think so too. Let's give it a try. So my company was the first e-commerce case study. Beretta USA, which is the oldest company in the world, was their second case study. And so we built that company up from a regional player to a national leader, sold that off in 2014. And then I started to think, I bet you could use podcast interviews much like we used to use guest blogs, a dozen years ago, right? Tap into an audience, use somebody else's platform to get that know, like, and trust, the mentions, the backlinks. So we started to test that in early 2014. It worked amazing. So much so that I'm like, now the engineer in me said, it's got to be something. It's got to be a personality. It's got to be the niche. So we kept testing it, refining it. It really came through as a system. And in 2015, I launched a cheesy little PDF book that I gave away and did an online course. I never took the course out of beta, Josh, because like you said before, um, people would tell me, yeah, I got the course, but I didn't get through it. And I didn't want to sell something if people weren't getting value. And the honest ones were the ones that said, I don't want to learn this. I want to be the guest. You take care of the rest. So based on their questions and their requests, we started to beta test it in 2015, took it out of beta in 2016, and now, going 5 years into it, we've got a team of 18, all a distributed workforce. We've got two in Europe, two in Canada, and the rest of the United States, and we serve about 100 clients. A lot of authors, coaches, speakers, and brands. And I think it's amazing because I think all of our clients have one thing in common, that obscurity is their biggest problem. They could help so many people if they just knew about them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to give your agency a plug in that, as you know, this is about episode 270 or 280. So I've been at this a while, and I've had lots and lots of agencies send people to me, and almost none of them do it well. Yours is far and away the best that we've dealt with. So you should be congratulated that. And it's interesting as you're telling your stories. I'm sitting here thinking, boy, we're on a very similar path. I also found HubSpot back in their very early days, and I'm still grandfathered in at the price I came in at, which is a bargain. And I'm in love with those guys for many, many things. In fact, one of my great customer service stories is around Brian Halligan with a problem I was having. And the way I found them, of course, was through the Grateful Dead, because Brian Halligan and David Meerman Scott wrote this really cool book called Marketing Secrets of the Grateful Dead. And I could not resist reading that book. And they were right on the money about so many interesting things the Dead have done from a business point of view,
Mhm.
that I ended up checking out HubSpot. And we had just done a new WordPress site. And the guy who did our WordPress site could not explain to me how to use it. So I was really frustrated. So we ended up going to the very first version of HubSpot, and we've been on their platform ever since. They're a really good company. I will say that. So your journey is a really interesting one. Would you call this business a passion business, or would you call it just the next step in your life?
I'd say it's a passion business, but it's also the next step in my life, right? It's the evolution of everything that I've learned has come back to this. Um, to me, when I worked in corporate America, I was counting the days until I could retire. And um, it was like the golden handcuffs and everything. And at that point, I was talking to a friend that we had gone to high school together, and we decided that we could never retire, because if we retired, it would drive our wives crazy, and our golf games are really, really bad. So we decided that for us, retirement was going to be doing fun things with interesting people and writing it all off as a business expense. Well, my friend Brian died a number of years ago, very suddenly. And when I turned 50, about 5 years ago, I looked at that and I said, I'm retired, right? I'm only doing fun things with interesting people and writing it all off as a business expense. So I don't look at this as work. People will say, well, how many hours a day or a week do you work? I usually say about 20, right? And my wife would roll her eyes and she's like, no, more like 60 or 70. And I'm like, no, there's only 20 that you would have to pay me to actually do this. Most of it is fun. Like talking to you right now, that's not work. This is fun. Um, Talking with clients or new clients, that's fun. Getting to learn from all of these people, that's what I would do in retirement. So for me, it's passion. And one of our core values is um, life is short, work should be fun. My personal one is no job pays well enough to suck. But I figured that wasn't politically correct enough. So life is short, work should be fun.
Oh, that's a great one. I actually, my personal mission in life is do interesting things with interesting people. So everything I do, I look through that lens, whether it's work related or non-work related. So you and I are very much on the same page as far as that goes. Tom, I wish we had more time to keep going on, because I would love to talk with you about values. But unfortunately, we just went past the 23-minute mark on the podcast. And I try to keep these things to what I call the commute cast. So you can actually listen to it on either driving into work or going home from work. So I'm going to bet, and I hope there are a bunch of people who are listening to this podcast who are going to be fascinated by what you said and want to learn more. So how do they do that?
The easiest way is just go to interview valet with a v.com/ cash flow code. And everything Josh and I talked about, it'll be there. I'll put a copy of my book, Podcast Guest Profits. I sell a lot of them on Amazon, but I give more of those away. I'll also put all of my social media there. So if you want to get in touch with me, you don't have to figure out which Tom Schwab in Kalamazoo I am. Just go to interviewvalet.com/ cash flow code.
And for those of you watching on YouTube Live or Facebook Live, it's on the screen right now. And I also have an offer for you, is that one of the things that I think is really important for all companies is to be sale ready. Now, sale ready does not mean you are about to go out and sell your company. It just means your company is in a position where other people would want to own it, like Tom's. So I wrote an ebook on the 8 steps you need to do, the 8 levels you need to do to create a sale ready company. It's really easy to get. You just go to www.sustainablebusiness.co/sale ready. That's www.sustainablebusiness.co, not .com, /sale ready. So this is Josh Patrick. We're with Tom Schwab. You're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.